In 1586, a queen's life was ended, not by a sword
Right.
or a battlefield defeat, but by a secret compartment hidden inside a simple wooden beer keg.
Which is just, it's such a wild detail.
It really is. Because, for centuries, we've been taught that history is decided by the people under the spotlight.
Mm-hmm.
We look at the kings, the presidents, the generals making these sweeping, dramatic declarations.
Yeah, the people on the stage.
Exactly. And we assume they're the ones driving the plot of human civilization.
But that's just the visible action. I mean, it's the history recorded in textbooks, categorized by dates and treaties, and it feels very definitive because it's right out in the open.
But the actual leverage shaping those treaties, right, and the battlefield decisions, that almost never happens on the stage.
Never.
So welcome to this deep dive. Today, we are pulling from a massive stack of declassified intelligence archives, academic research, and historical case studies. And our mission here is to decode how the invisible world of spies, code breakers, and, well, whistleblowers has actively engineered the visible world you and I live in today.
Because once you peek behind that curtain and you see the people pulling the levers, dropping the trapdoors, whispering lines to the actors on stage, your understanding of global power just completely fractures.
It really does. It forces you to abandon that Hollywood thriller version of espionage.
Oh, absolutely. The reality is far less about some tuxedo-wearing lone wolf agent.
Right. No James Bond here.
No, not at all.
Right.
It's far more about systemic, calculated tradecraft. Espionage is the ultimate hidden architecture behind how nations actually rise, fall, and negotiate dominance.
Okay, let's unpack this, because I read the section on the ancient origins of this tradecraft. And what really struck me is how early leaders figured out that brute force is just, it's incredibly inefficient.
Yeah, it's expensive and risky.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Knowing the enemy's secrets was always more valuable than just showing up with a bigger army. Sun Tzu mapped this out meticulously in The Art of War way back in the 4th century BC.
Oh, really did.
He didn't just suggest using spies. He categorized them into this highly specific methodology.
Right, because he fundamentally understood that warfare is essentially an exercise in information asymmetry.
Yeah.
He advised that one who knows the enemy and knows himself will not be endangered in 100 engagements. And to achieve that, he broke tradecraft down into specialized roles.
Right, the 3 main ones.
Exactly. The secret informant, the penetration agent, and the disinformation agent.
And translating those ancient categories into a modern corporate environment makes the mechanics so relatable for you listening. Like, the secret informant is your agent in place. Today, that's the disgruntled corporate insider quietly downloading the client list onto a flash drive.
Right, the guy in the cubicle next to you.
Yeah. And then the penetration agent is the person who has direct access to the enemy commanders. So think of like a high-level executive headhunter who casually has the ear of the entire C-suite.
And then there's the disinformation agent, which is arguably the most sophisticated of the 3.
Oh, for sure.
Their job isn't to gather intelligence at all.
Wait, really?
Yeah, their job is to deploy a calculated mix of true and false details to completely disorient the enemy's decision-making.
Okay. So in an office setting, that's the strategic gossip. The person deliberately planting fake news about a product launch timeline, so the competition wastes millions developing the wrong countermeasure.
Exactly. The tactics really haven't changed in 2.5 millennia, just the arena.
But looking at these ancient strategies, I have to challenge the actual impact here. Like, were these early spy masters truly shifting the tectonic plates of history? Or were they mostly just paranoid rulers grasping at shadows?
What's fascinating here is that the defining characteristic of a truly world-altering spy master is that they don't react to shadows.
Okay.
They actively design the room so they can control exactly where the shadows fall.
Oh, wow.
And this brings us right back to that beer keg in 1586.
Yes. Sir Francis Walsingham.
Right. Queen Elizabeth I's spy master. He wasn't just catching spies, he was essentially inventing the entire concept of modern counterintelligence.
So he was targeting Mary, Queen of Scots, right? Who was held in custody under extremely strict security.
Very strict.
Walsingham wanted to expose her plotting against Elizabeth. But he knew that if he just smashed down her door and confiscated her letters, she would deny everything.
Yeah, she'd say they were planted. And the wider conspiracy would remain completely hidden.
So he engineered a psychological trap.
He did. Walsingham arranged for a local brewer to supply Mary's household with beer, and he allowed a single covert exception to her security to emerge, like, organically.
A secret, watertight compartment inside the kegs where she could smuggle letters in and out.
Exactly. He gave her a secure channel that he entirely controlled.
That psychological manipulation completely changes the dynamic
Yeah.
because he gave her the illusion of perfect security.
And the illusion is the weapon. Because Mary felt completely safe, she wrote freely and explicitly about a conspiracy to assassinate Elizabeth.
Unbelievable.
And Walsingham just had his cryptographers intercept the kegs. They carefully opened the seals, deciphered the encoded letters, copied every single word, and then flawlessly resealed them and sent them on their way.
So she never suspected a thing.
Not until the day Walsingham presented her own letters as the evidence that led to her execution.
Wow.
He designed the trap that caught a queen purely through the mechanics of human psychology.
But, Walsingham's success reveals a critical limitation. He was a singular, brilliant individual running a highly personalized network.
Right, very hands-on.
Yeah. But as empires expanded globally and the Industrial Revolution kicked into gear, nations realized that relying on a single genius whispering in a monarch's ear just wasn't scalable.
No, not at all. To survive, empires had to industrialize the business of stealing secrets.
They needed permanence. They needed funded bureaucracies.
Exactly. And that shift from individual cunning to institutional machinery is best illustrated by 18th century France and the creation of the Cabinet Noir.
The Black Chamber.
Yes, the Black Chamber.
This was a systemic, state-sponsored operation where the mail of foreign diplomats and political targets was routinely intercepted. It's essentially the 18th century equivalent of reading someone's direct messages before they even get the notification on their phone.
That's a perfect analogy. And the logistics of the Cabinet Noir were incredibly sophisticated for the time.
Yeah, the sources talk about the artisans.
Right. They employed specialized artisans who used heated knives to melt wax seals without breaking them. They utilized amalgams to forge exact replicas of personal signet rings.
That's so intense.
They'd extract the letters, have a whole team of linguists and cryptographers translate and copy the contents, and then reseal the envelopes so perfectly that the recipient had zero indication their private thoughts were now state property.
And the psychological fallout of this bureaucracy was fascinating. The sources detail how in Paris, political dissidents were utterly convinced they were surrounded by an invisible army of 30,000 police spies.
30,000?
Yeah, it paralyzed them.
Yeah.
It created a society operating under extreme hyper-caution.
Yet, when you look at the police records from the era, they reveal there were only about 300 paid informers in the entire city.
Wait, 300? That's it?
That's it. The police deliberately cultivated the myth of the 30,000 spies. The illusion of total, inescapable surveillance was a highly cost-effective method of social control.
It's the concept of the panopticon applying to an entire capital city.
Exactly. And this newly industrialized intelligence apparatus wasn't just obsessed with military movements or suppressing political dissidents. Intelligence rapidly evolved into a pure economic weapon.
Right, the French and Spanish governments were systematically sending covert agents into Britain for the express purpose of industrial espionage.
Because Britain was the epicenter of the Industrial Revolution,
Yeah.
foreign governments allocated massive, dedicated budgets to steal the underlying technology behind steam engines, advanced metallurgy, and even the specialized hardware required for manufacturing plate glass.
Because stealing a competitor's blueprints meant you could bypass decades of costly research and development.
Precisely. Why invent it when you can steal it?
True. However, establishing a massive intelligence bureaucracy doesn't automatically guarantee that the intelligence being gathered is actually accurate or beneficial.
Oh, definitely not.
The American Civil War provides a staggering example of how flawed intelligence analysis can physically alter the timeline of a nation. The Union Army relied on Alan Pinkerton to head up their intelligence service.
Right. And Pinkerton's tenure demonstrates how the interpretation of raw data is often more dangerous than a lack of data.
How so?
Well, Pinkerton had agents infiltrating the South, conducting interrogations, and observing troop movements, but his methodology was deeply flawed.
Okay.
He relied heavily on interviewing terrified deserters and local civilians, and he consistently double-counted Confederate regiments.
So he fed Union General George McClellan wildly exaggerated estimates of the Confederate Army's strength.
Yes, and McClellan took that intelligence as absolute truth. Because he believed he was vastly outnumbered, McClellan became paralyzed by caution.
Right. He hesitated during critical campaigns when he actually held a massive numerical advantage.
Exactly. Pinkerton's bad intelligence, his systemic exaggerations, dictated military strategy just as effectively as Walsingham's brilliant beer keg trap.
Wow.
It proves a fundamental law of geopolitics. Decisive action is never based on objective reality. action is solely dictated by what a leader believes is true in the moment.
That is a great point. Pinkerton's failures prove that human interpretation is incredibly vulnerable to bias, distance, and physical limitations.
Yeah.
And as we move into the 20th century, warfare scaled globally. The front lines became thousands of miles long. Nations realized they couldn't rely solely on humans crossing physical borders to interview locals.
No, the demand for information necessitated intercepting the enemy's very thoughts invisibly across oceans, which brings us to the birth of signals intelligence, or SIGINT.
And the transition from human intelligence to signals intelligence was really driven by technological necessity. Just look at the very beginning of World War I.
Right, August 3, 1914.
Yeah, the British executed a physical maneuver that carried profound technological consequences. They deployed a ship to literally dredge up and cut Germany's transatlantic submarine telegraph cables.
Which is just a brilliant tactical move.
It is. By severing those physical underwater lines of communication, the British forced Germany to transmit all of their high-level diplomatic and military messages through the air.
They forced Germany onto radio. And the fundamental vulnerability of radio is that it broadcasts outward in a sphere.
Right.
Anyone with an antenna attuned to the right frequency can intercept the transmission. So the British immediately set up a decryption unit at the Admiralty, famously known as Room 40.
And Room 40 didn't just passively listen. The sources show they actively combined raw radio intercepts with salvaged German codebooks recovered from sunken cruisers. This allowed them to monitor German fleet movements in real time. But the ultimate triumph of Room 40 happened in 1917 when they intercepted the Zimmermann telegram.
Yeah, the Zimmermann telegram is arguably the most consequential intelligence intercept in modern history.
Can you break that down for us?
Sure. It was a deeply encrypted message from the German Foreign Office to their ambassador in Mexico. They were proposing a secret military alliance. Germany offered to help Mexico recover territory in Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona if Mexico would declare war on the United States.
I mean, that is bold.
Very bold. But the British decrypted this proposal, carefully handed it over to the American government, and the resulting public outrage served as the direct catalyst that brought the United States into World War I.
One single intercepted radio wave changed the trajectory of a global conflict.
It really did. And that success cemented the reality that wars would no longer be won solely by artillery. They would be won by mathematicians.
Right. And this acceleration of code breaking reached its zenith during World War II. The United States established the Magic Project, which was entirely dedicated to breaking evolving Japanese diplomatic codes, which progressed from systems codenamed Red to Below-E and finally to Purple.
And the mechanics of the Purple E machine are fascinating because it represented a massive leap forward. It wasn't a manual code book where a clerk substituted one word for another.
Right.
It was a highly complex electromechanical cipher machine that used telephone stepping switches to constantly alter the encryption pathway.
Telephone switches?
Yeah, it was incredibly intricate. And the Japanese diplomatic corps possessed absolute faith in Purple E. They assumed that because a machine was generating the encryption through complex cascading mathematical variables, it was functionally unbreakable by human minds.
But the American codebreakers managed to reverse engineer the mathematical patterns without ever actually capturing a Purple E machine.
Which is mind-blowing.
Truly, they built an analog device that mimicked the exact clicking and clacking of the Japanese original. This meant the Allies were reading the highly classified messages of the Japanese ambassador to Germany, General Hiroshi Oshima, where she was taking detailed tours of German fortifications, chatting strategy with Hitler, and then transmitting all those plans back to Tokyo using the Purple E machine.
And Roosevelt and Churchill were reading those exact same messages, often before the officials in Tokyo even had a chance to decode them.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. I have to push back a little. If the Japanese diplomats didn't even know Purple E was broken, how much of World War II was essentially fought with the Allies playing with their opponents' cards face up on the table?
Well, the Allies possessed a direct, real-time window into German strategic planning, but it highlights a recurring vulnerability throughout the history of espionage: technological overconfidence.
Right, hubris.
Exactly. The absolute certainty that your system is secure is the exact blind spot an adversary will exploit. The Japanese trusted their machines implicitly.
So technology gave intelligence agencies the raw data, the logistics, and the troop movements. But raw data doesn't give you the underlying intent.
No, it doesn't.
When the hot wars ended and we entered the Cold War, the world was held in a nuclear standoff. Reading a decrypted message is useless if you fundamentally misunderstand the psychology of the person who sent it.
And the source material provides a very sobering reality check regarding the Cold War. Historian Raymond L. Garthoff extensively analyzed the declassified archives from both sides, and he reached a definitive conclusion.
Which was?
There were no successful moles operating at the top political decision-making level in Washington or Moscow.
Wait, no double agents sitting in the Oval Office or the Kremlin's inner circle manipulating nuclear policy?
None.
So, what does this all mean? Is all that spy fiction we consume just overblown hype? The trope of a single operative pulling the strings from the inside is a myth.
In terms of an agent directly authoring major and geopolitical policy for the enemy, yes, it is entirely a myth.
Wow.
This raises an important question, though, because the human intelligence gathered during this period still altered the fate of the world, just through a different mechanism. And the perfect case study here is Oleg Gordievsky.
Gordievsky was a highly placed KGB officer who became a crucial double agent working for British intelligence MI6.
Right. And Gordievsky's ultimate value to the West wasn't in stealing blueprints for a new Soviet intercontinental ballistic missile or providing lists of troop deployments.
Okay, then what was it?
His value was profound psychological empathy. He provided Western leaders with deep, nuanced insight into the collective mindset of the Kremlin's aging leadership.
Because during the early 1980s, the tension was at a breaking point. The West assumed the Soviet Union's aggressive military posturing was preparation for global conquest.
Exactly.
But Gordievsky explained to MI6 that the KGB and the Soviet leadership were genuinely terrified. They were convinced that the West was preparing to launch a preemptive nuclear strike against them under the guise of a NATO training exercise.
Right. Gordievsky was able to convince Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher that Soviet bellicosity wasn't born of confidence.
Yeah.
It was operating from a place of deep fear and an awareness of their own systemic economic weakness.
And by understanding the actual why behind the enemy's actions, the Western leaders fundamentally shifted their own approach. Reagan moderated his aggressive, evil empire rhetoric.
Because they finally understood the psychological reality of their adversary, they avoided triggering an accidental nuclear war.
Which is huge.
Massive. And this shift in tone directly paved the way for productive negotiations when Mikhail Gorbachev eventually took power, which catalyzed the end of the Cold War.
Gordievsky really proves that understanding how your enemy perceives the world is often vastly more powerful than knowing the exact yield of their weapons.
Absolutely.
But as the Cold War concludes and we move into the modern, hyper-connected digital frontier, the mechanics of espionage fracture once again.
Yeah, they do.
What the sources make incredibly clear is that the modern spy master's greatest vulnerability isn't a foreign agent seducing a diplomat to steal a password. The ultimate threat is the insider with authorized access and a portable storage drive.
We have fully entered the era of the mega leak.
Yeah.
Cyber espionage has fundamentally altered the scale of exposure. In Walsingham's era, a massive intelligence haul was copying a dozen letters from a beer keg. Today, a single whistleblower can copy millions of encrypted files in a matter of seconds.
And the Panama Papers in 2016 demonstrate this terrifying new scale. It was a massive anonymous leak of 11.5 million confidential documents from the offshore law firm Mossack Fonseca.
It was staggering.
It really was. It exposed this intricate global network of shell companies, systemic tax evasion, and political corruption touching dozens of nations.
And the real-world impact was immediate and destructive for those exposed. This wasn't abstract intelligence, It was weaponized transparency. The leak directly led to the disqualification and removal of Pakistan's Prime Minister, Nawaz Sharif, after the documents revealed glaring discrepancies in how his family properties were financed.
It also forced the resignation of the Prime Minister of Iceland.
Right. And it triggered global systemic debates on the legal ethics of offshore tax havens. The raw information itself was the weapon, deployed globally all at once.
And it isn't just financial data being weaponized, it's the raw, unedited data of international geopolitics. The sources extensively detail the Palestine Papers leak in 2011.
Oh, yeah. This is a crucial one.
This involved over 1,600 pages of highly confidential internal memos, emails, and maps covering years of peace negotiations between the Israeli government and the Palestine Liberation Organization. and they were leaked to the Al Jazeera news network.
And before we dive into this, we just want to make it absolutely clear to you listening that we are not endorsing any viewpoints or actions contained in these leaks. We are strictly here to impartially report what the original source material reveals about the mechanics of the negotiations.
Exactly. Looking objectively at the contents, the documents exposed the unvarnished internal mechanics of negotiations that ultimately failed. They revealed that Palestinian negotiators had been amenable to major concessions behind closed doors, including significant land exchanges in Jerusalem.
Right.
And this revelation deeply angered the Palestinian public, who felt their negotiators were acting entirely against popular opinion and operating without a mandate.
Conversely, the papers rebutted the prevailing public narrative that the Palestinians were the sole uncooperative party in the process. The documents revealed highly disruptive diplomatic tactics utilized by both the Israelis and the Americans during the talks.
The leak caused widespread protests and condemnation from all sides. It severely damaged the fragile trust required for the peace process and raised serious, lasting questions about whether the United States could continue to function as a neutral mediator in the region.
It was a massive disruption.
Yeah. And again, this wasn't the result of a hostile foreign intelligence agency executing a complex operation. It was a digital leak that dragged the private, messy realities of statecraft out into the glaring public square.
Which brings the entire architecture of espionage full circle. Because you, listening to this, interacting with endless streams a day every single day on your phone, your laptop, your smart devices, you are actively participating in a world where the great game never stopped.
It just evolved.
Exactly. It evolved its tools. It migrated from Sun Tzu's ancient battlefields into Walsingham's wooden kegs, through the wax-melting artisans of the Cabinet Noir, and now it resides permanently in the massive server farms housing the digital footprint of our civilization.
The grand stage play is still going on. The people in the spotlight are still making their sweeping declarations. But the invisible crew operating in the shadows behind the curtain, they possess tools now that defy comprehension.
They can intercept more, analyze more, and map our psychologies better than any spy master in history could have ever dreamed.
The mechanisms of power are still hidden. The shadows have just gone digital.
So true.
And that leaves us with a final, lingering thought for you to take away. We look back at Mary, Queen of Scots, and we know exactly how her secret letters were intercepted. We look back at World War I, and we know exactly how the Zimmerman telegram was caught in the air.
Right, we can study the flaws of those ancient systems.
But consider the emerging world of quantum computing. Right now, intelligence agencies are engaged in harvest now, decrypt later campaigns. They are quietly vacuuming up petabytes of your encrypted data, knowing their current machines can't read it. Yet. So what seemingly unbreakable digital vaults that we trust our lives with today are currently sitting in a server just waiting for a machine 50 years from now to finally tune the key. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are going to do something that might sound a little bit counterintuitive. We're going to look at a map of the world, but we're going to try to ignore the geography.
Which is a very difficult thing for the human brain to do. We're wired to see land masses and borders.
Exactly. I mean, when I close my eyes and picture the world, I picture the continents, right? The countries, and, usually the big dots. The places where the most people are. You see a city with 20 million people, a Lagos, a Mumbai, a Sao Paulo, and your brain just instinctively says, okay, that's a center of power. That's where the action is.
It's almost a biological default, really. We equate mass with gravity. If there are that many people huddled together, surely they must be running the show.
But that's the hook for today. We're basically taking a red pen to that mental map. We're looking at a whole stack of research data ranging from 2024 all the way through projections for 2026 that suggest the actual hierarchy of the world is, well, almost invisible.
Right.
It doesn't care about population size. It doesn't care about national borders. And in some cases, it barely cares about the country it happens to be sitting in.
We are talking about the global city. And you're right, this isn't about geography anymore. It's all about connectivity. We're going to be looking at the nodes, as they're called, of the global economic network.
And just to set the stakes here, we aren't just going to list cool cities to visit on vacation. We have a mission today. We're going to decode why, despite Brexit, despite the rise of Asia, despite, everything we hear in the news about the changing world order, 2 specific cities are still sitting in a kind of VIP lounge all by themselves.
That's a very, very exclusive club.
And we're also going to figure out why lovability, yes, literally how lovable a city is suddenly a hard economic metric that, I guess, investment bankers now care about.
It's fascinating, isn't it?
And ultimately, we're going to ask a question that borders on political philosophy. Have these cities become so powerful that they've effectively sort of stopped being part of their own countries?
The city-state theory. It's a fascinating place to end up, and the data, I think, really does point us in that direction.
So let's unpack this. We have a lot of sources today. We're looking at the JWC classification, which is the academic gold standard, really. We've got indices from Kearney, Oxford Economics, the Mori Memorial Foundation in Japan, and Resonance. It's a full spectrum of data from 2024 to 2026.
It's the most comprehensive look at this urban hierarchy that we can get.
I want to start with the vocabulary, though, because global city, it feels like a marketing term, doesn't it?
It does.
It feels like something a mayor puts on a glossy brochure to try and get the Olympics, or convince Amazon to build a headquarters there.
Sure.
But in the documents we're looking at today, this is a rigorous academic definition, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It's a term of art in economic geography. And to really understand it, you have to decouple size from function. That is the hardest hurdle for people to get over.
Okay, so decouple it for me. Why isn't size the same thing as power?
Okay, think of it like a computer network. You can have a massive hard drive that holds a ton of data. That's a city with a huge population. Millions of people, stories, businesses, a huge repository.
Right.
But if that hard drive isn't connected to the internet, if it can't send or receive information rapidly, it's only locally important. It's globally isolated.
So it's a repository, but it's not a transmitter.
Exactly. A global city, on the other hand, is the high-speed router. It might be physically smaller. It might even have fewer people than a megacity. But every packet of information, every dollar of capital, it all flows through it.
So it's a primary node. I see that term in the research.
That is the technical term, yes. A primary node in the global economic network. And the definition we're working with today is that a global city must have direct, tangible effects on global socioeconomic affairs.
Tangible effects. I like that phrasing. It means it's not just about influence or, soft power in the abstract.
No, it means consequences. If a decision is made in a boardroom in a global city, a factory could close in Brazil, a stock market rallies in Tokyo, and a fashion trend starts in Milan. The output isn't just local. The blast radius is planetary.
This feels like a very modern concept, like post-internet, post-globalization. I assume this idea came about when we started wiring the world with fiber optics.
You'd think so, wouldn't you? It feels that way. But looking at the history in our notes, we're way, way off on that assumption. The connectivity might be digital now, but the concept of the world city is actually Victorian.
Wow. 1886. That's the date in the notes here.
May 1886, in the Illustrated London News.
And they weren't talking about London, which is the really funny part.
No, they were describing Liverpool.
Liverpool, which for anyone who only knows Liverpool for, the Beatles or football, might sound bizarre. Why Liverpool in 1886?
You have to look at the context of the British Empire. Liverpool was the pivot point. It was the hub of global trade. Cotton, tea, spices, manufactured goods, people, it all flowed through those docks.
Right.
And the article in the Illustrated London News defined Liverpool not by who lived there, but by its external connections.
Ah, so that is the seed of the modern idea right there. A city defined by who it talks to, not just who it houses.
Precisely. Liverpool was sort of the beta test, and the term then bounces around academia for about a century. Patrick Geddes, the famous sociologist, he uses world city formally in 1915.
Okay.
But the framework we are using today, the one that actually governs how corporations choose where to put their HQs, that was really solidified in 1991.
This is the Saskia Sassen book, right?
The global city, New York, London, Tokyo. That book changed the game. Before Sassen, urban planners and sociologists were just obsessed with megacities.
Which is the size thing again.
Right. Megacity's been around since 1904. It's strictly a numbers game. It describes high-density urban sprawl, the sheer logistical challenge of, housing 10 million people in one place.
Right.
Sassen came in and said, stop counting heads, start counting money, start counting the flows of information.
She shifted the focus entirely to function.
Yes. She argued that in the late 20th and early 21st centuries, the economy was becoming all about specialized services, finance, law, advertising, tech, and those services were clustering in very, very specific places.
So if we want to put it on a bumper sticker, a megacity is a lot of people. A global city is a lot of power.
That is the perfect distinction. And sure, sometimes they can overlap. Tokyo is the ultimate example. It is both a massive population center, a megacity, and a massive power center, a global city.
But they don't have to overlap.
Not at all. Look at a city like Zurich or Geneva. Tiny populations relative to a megacity like Cairo or Karachi, but they have massive global city status because of banking, diplomacy, international organizations.
Okay, so we know what it is. It's a node. It's a router. Now I want to know how you get in. If I'm a mayor of a mid-sized city, say I'm the mayor of Denver or Manchester, and I want to level up to become a global city, what's the checklist? Because the source material here breaks this down into pillars.
It's a mix of variable and, well, fluid criteria, but there are 4 absolute non-negotiables. If you don't have these, you just aren't a player. The first is economic, but it's specific. It's not just having rich people or a high GDP.
Okay.
It's about having the machinery of capitalism.
So we're talking stock exchanges.
Stock exchanges are the engine, yes, but it's also the headquarters of multinational corporations. And crucially, it's the density of international financial services.
Define that for me. What counts as an international financial service?
It means you need the whole ecosystem.
Yeah.
You don't just need the bank. You need the law firm that understands international maritime law to write the contracts. You need the insurance giant that covers global shipping against piracy.
Right.
You need the big 4 accounting firms to audit the books for shareholders in 3 different continents. It's the entire infrastructure that allows capital to move safely across borders.
So it's really the plumbing of the global economy.
Yeah.
That plumbing isn't in your city. The money just gets stuck.
Exactly. Pillar 2 is influence. This is about trade dominance. Does your city control a region? Do you make decisions that your neighbors then have to follow?
Okay, so you have the money and the power. What's pillar 3?
Infrastructure. But again, globally focused infrastructure. Major manufacturing is good, but you need the ports, these massive container facilities. And in the 21st century, you absolutely need digital dominance. You need to be a media hub. News has to come from your city.
Like a CNN, a BBC, and an Al Jazeera. You need the broadcast towers.
And the server farms. You need to be a hub where information enters the global network and leaves it.
And the 4th one is the people. Human capital.
Yes, and this is where it gets really interesting, sociologically speaking.
Yeah.
You cannot be a global city if you are monocultural. It's just impossible.
Why is that impossible? Wouldn't a really efficient, unified culture be good for business?
Not for global business, because you are connecting to the entire world. If you want to do business with Jakarta and Berlin and Sao Paulo and Nairobi, you need people inside your city who speak those languages, who understand those cultures, who know how to negotiate in those contexts. You need high diversity.
So diversity isn't just a nice-to-have social policy here. It's a hard economic prerequisite.
It is a strategic asset, 100%. You also need the top-tier universities to attract and cultivate that talent. The whole brain drain phenomenon is basically global cities sucking the smartest people out of everywhere else to maintain that human capital edge.
I want to make this concrete for everyone listening. The source material gives us a breakdown of Manhattan as the alpha prototype.
Yes.
Let's look at Manhattan through this checklist.
Yeah.
Because when you list it out, it's almost conical how perfectly it fits.
It's the textbook definition. If we look at the economic pillar, you have the New York Stock Exchange and the NASDAQ. That's not just a bank. That is the literal heartbeat of global finance. Political influence, you have the United Nations headquarters. I mean, that is the literal definition of an internationally political organization. You have the actual room where the world meets to argue.
That's a big one.
Cultural influence, you have Broadway, you have the Met, you have the Guggenheim, you have MoMA. These aren't just local museums. They are world-renowned institutions that set the global agenda for the art world.
And then you have the landmarks. Times Square, the Empire State Building.
Exactly.
I mean, you can show a picture of the Empire State Building to someone in a remote village in almost any country, and there's a very good chance they'll recognize it. That's branding power.
That's the brand. But the key, and this is what Sasson really emphasized in her work, is the density. You have all of that packed onto one small island.
Right. You can literally walk from the UN to Times Square in a half hour.
Exactly. And that creates what they call an agglomeration effect. The banker meets the diplomat at the gallery opening, and they have dinner at a restaurant run by a celebrity chef who just flew in from Paris. That friction, that physical collision of different industries, creates innovation and power. It creates a gravitational pull that is very, very hard to replicate.
Okay, so that's the definition. We know what we're looking for. Now I want to get to the competitive part. Who is winning? We have data ranging from 2024 to 2026. Let's start with the JWC. You mentioned them earlier, the Globalization and World Cities Research Network.
Yes, based out of Loughborough University in the UK, they are, I would say, arguably the gold standard for this specific type of economic networking analysis.
And they have a very specific way of ranking things. They don't do number one, number two. They use tiers like alpha, beta, gamma.
Right. And their methodology is fascinating. They don't care about how nice your parks are or if your subway runs on time. They only measure one thing: international connectedness. They look specifically at advanced producer services, so accountancy, advertising, banking, finance, and law.
So they're literally mapping the office networks of these big global firms.
That's exactly what they're doing. They map how firms in these sectors connect cities to one another. If a top law firm in London has a massive office in New York and they are constantly sharing work, that's a very strong link. If they have a tiny satellite office in a smaller city, that's a weak link.
So they're tracing the invisible wires of the corporate world.
Precisely. And based on the 2024 edition of their data, there is an incredibly exclusive tier at the very, very top, the Alpha++ tier.
Alpha double plus. How many cities make the cut?
Only 2.
Just 2. In the whole world.
Just 2, London and New York City.
That is staggering to me. I mean, we hear so much about the Asian century. We hear about the decline of the West. We hear about the chaos of Brexit in the UK or political polarization in the US. And yet, the hard data says these 2 are still sitting alone at the top of the mountain.
It speaks to the incredible inertia of institutional power. You can't just build a 300-year-old legal system or a global insurance market overnight. London and New York are the twin engines of the global service economy. They are so deeply wired into the system that even, major political chaos hasn't knocked them off that Alpha++ perch. Not yet, anyway.
They are, in a sense, too big to fail as cities.
In terms of their global connectivity, yes. They are the supernodes.
Okay, so who is knocking on the door? Who is in that next tier down, the Alpha Plus tier?
This is where we see the rest of the heavy hitters. The Alpha Plus list includes Beijing, Dubai, Hong Kong, Paris, Shanghai, Singapore, Sydney, and Tokyo.
That is a powerful list. And it feels much more balanced globally, I have to say.
It does. It really reflects the global spread of power. You have the Asian giants, Beijing, Shanghai, Hong Kong, Tokyo, Singapore. That confirms the economic shift to the east. You have the Middle Eastern hub in Dubai. You have Europe represented by Paris. And you have Sydney anchoring the Oceania region.
It really shows that this global city status isn't just a Western phenomenon anymore.
Oh, not at all. The weight is shifting. But let's look at how the rankings change when we switch indices. Because while JWC looks purely at connectivity, other groups look at different things. This is the battle for number 1.
Right. And we have a few different scorecards here for 2025 and 2026. Let's start with the Kearney Global Cities Index for 2025. What's their vibe? What do they measure?
So Kearney is looking at global engagement. They measure 27 different metrics across 5 dimensions: business activity, human capital, information exchange, cultural experience, and political engagement. So it's a bit more holistic than just law firms.
Okay, so who takes the crown in the Kearney Index?
New York City is #1, followed by London, then Paris, and then Tokyo.
Okay, so that's pretty consistent with the alpha concept so far.
Yeah.
New York and London leading the pack.
Then we have Oxford Economics, also looking at 2025. Now, they rank the world's largest 1,000 cities, but they put a very, very heavy weight on economic factors.
I mean, economics is in the name, so I'm assuming they care about GDP, growth, income, that sort of thing.
Exactly. And New York loves that kind of weighting.
Yeah.
Oxford Economics also ranks New York City, #1. London is #2. But here's where it gets interesting. Oxford places San Jose and Seattle in their top 5.
San Jose and Seattle, that's the Silicon Valley and, well, Amazon and Microsoft.
Exactly. If your metric is purely economic output and tech dynamism, those cities just rocket up the list. They generate an obscene amount of wealth per capita. But you won't find them in the top 10 of some of these other lists that value culture or history more.
That's a great point. It all depends on what you value.
Huh.
San Jose might have the money, but does it have the vibe?
And that brings us perfectly to the Maury Memorial Foundation. They are based in Tokyo. Their Global Power City Index for 2025 has a different winner entirely.
Oh. Who wins the Japanese ranking?
London is #1.
London beats New York.
In the Mori Index, yes. Followed by Tokyo, then NYC is third. Mori often values that cultural interaction and accessibility very highly. London tends to score incredibly well on things like the number of international visitors, major cultural events, and ease of travel.
So it's kind of the soft power index.
In a way, yes. And then we have one that sounds even more, well, emotional. The Resonance World's Best Cities ranking for 2026.
Resonance is interesting. Their methodology includes categories like lovability, along with livability and prosperity.
Yeah, lovability.
That sounds like a metric from a dating app. Is this city lovable? I mean, what does that even mean in an economic study?
It's about the experience. They measure culture, nightlife, dining, the vibe, as you said. They look at social media check-ins, online reviews, the quality of public parks. And in the 2026 Resonance ranking, London is #1 again.
So London seems to be winning the popularity contest.
It does very well on the soft power metrics. Resonance ranks NYC at #2, Paris #3, and Tokyo #4.
Now, a hard-nosed economist, maybe someone from that Oxford economics team, might look at that and say, who cares if the city is lovable? That's not power. Power is money.
But that economist would be completely wrong in the 2020s.
Explain that. Why does lovability matter to the bottom line?
Because we live in the era of mobile talent. The creative class, the coders, the bankers, the artists, the entrepreneurs, they can increasingly choose where they want to live, especially with remote work still being a major factor.
Right. If you can code for Google from anywhere, why live somewhere ugly or boring?
Exactly. If a city is unlovable, if it's just a concrete factory for GDP but has no nightlife and bad food, the best talent leaves. If the talent leaves, the companies eventually follow. If the companies leave, the tax base collapses.
So lovability is actually a leading indicator for economic retention and talent attraction.
It absolutely is. If you can attract the best minds because your city is beautiful and has great food and culture, that eventually translates into hard economic power. And that's why you see cities like Madrid, Rome, and Barcelona cracking the top 10 in the Resonance list.
Madrid, Rome, Barcelona. Those are cities people want to be in.
High quality of life, incredible food, great weather. They might not have the stock exchange volume of New York, but they have that magnetic pull for human capital.
It's the difference between a city you have to go to for a meeting and a city you want to move to for a new life.
And the Alpha plus cities, London and New York, somehow managed to be both. That's their secret sauce. You have to go there for business, but a lot of people also want to go there for the culture and the energy.
Let's talk about those outliers again. We mentioned San Jose and Seattle being high on the money list, but maybe lower on the culture list.
We can call those specialist global cities. They are hyper-efficient engines for a specific industry. San Jose is tech. Seattle is tech and logistics. But they lack the generalist power of the top-tier cities.
Right. London isn't just finance. It's also media, fashion, politics, and education. It's like a diversified portfolio.
Exactly. If the tech industry has a major crash, San Jose is in deep trouble. If tech crashes, London shrugs and pivots to insurance or tourism or law. That is the resilience factor.
And what about Dubai? You mentioned it was on that Alpha Plus list.
Dubai is a fascinating case study in manufactured status. It appears in the Alpha Plus list, and it also appears in the top 10 for both Mori and Resonance.
So it has really cemented its status then.
It has. I mean, think about it. Dubai didn't evolve over 1,000 years like London or Rome. It was built with a specific strategic intent to become a node.
Build it and they will come.
And they did. It successfully positioned itself as the node connecting East and West. It's a major air hub, a major financial hub for the entire region, and a luxury destination. It basically went down the checklist we talked about earlier and ticked all the boxes. It made itself indispensable.
I want to touch on one more specific index before we wrap up the rankings. The Global Financial Centers Index, GFCI, for 2025. This is for the money nerds.
This is pure finance. It uses over 29,000 assessments from finance professionals. It tracks where the money actually lives and moves.
So who wins the bank account war?
New York City is #1. London is #2.
Boring. Same as always.
But look at the rest of the list. Hong Kong is #3. Singapore is #4.
So Asia is completely dominating the pure finance game right behind the big two.
Absolutely. And look at San Francisco at #5.
Wow, San Francisco cracks the top 5 there.
All that venture capital, the tech money, even if the city has other well-publicized issues, the sheer volume of capital flowing through it is just undeniable.
And I noticed Shanghai and Shenzhen also make the top 10 for finance.
Shenzhen, that's a city that barely existed 40 years
It
ago.
was a fishing village, wasn't it?
Essentially, yes. And now it is a top 10 global financial center. That is the sheer speed of urbanization and globalization in China. It basically didn't exist. And now it runs the world's hardware industry and handles these massive financial flows.
So if we step back and synthesize all of this, we've looked at the history, the checklist, all these different rankings. When you look at this hierarchy of strategic locations, what is the core truth here?
The core truth is that the world is wired through these specific points. And while the lists vary slightly based on whether you care more about GDP or nightlife, a clear consensus exists. New York and London are the current alpha plus heavyweights. They are the supernodes of the system.
But the definition of power itself is expanding. It's not just about stock exchanges anymore. It's about environment. It's about that lovability factor.
And it's about resilience. The cities that can combine economic might with a high quality of life are the ones that will stay on top. The cities that are just factories or just tourist traps will probably fall behind in the long run.
It makes you wonder about the future of the nation state, doesn't it?
That is the big question, I think.
And that's where I want to leave our listeners today. We've been talking about these cities as if they're these independent entities. And in a way, aren't they?
That is the provocative thought. We call it the city-state theory.
Walk me through this.
Well, think about a senior banker in London. They probably have more in common culturally, economically, and lifestyle-wise with a banker in New York or Hong Kong than they do with, say, a farmer in the north of England.
Right. They eat the same kind of food. They wear the same brands. They trade the same stocks. They watch the same shows. They live inside the global city bubble.
Exactly. They are part of a transnational class. And these cities, they generate a massive percentage of their nation's GDP. They're the economic engines.
So the tension is, do these cities really belong to their countries anymore? Or have they in some sense outgrown them?
It's a tension that plays out in politics every single day. The global city versus the nation. You see it in voting patterns. The cities vote one way, the rest of the country votes another. The cities want open borders for talent. The country might want protectionism.
We saw that with Brexit. London voted overwhelmingly to stay in the EU. A lot of the rest of England voted to leave.
That is the perfect example. London was voting as a global city. It wanted to keep its connections open. The rest of the country was voting as a nation. It wanted sovereignty.
So are we heading toward a future where these alpha plus cities become independent city-states in all but name, serving the global network more than they serve their own nations?
It's a tension that isn't going away. As these nodes become more and more powerful, the tether connecting them to the nation-state gets stretched thinner and thinner. We might look back at this period as the time when the map really started to change, from one of countries to one of cities.
Something to chew on the next time you look at that flight map in the seat back pocket. The map isn't nations anymore. It's just lines connecting dots.
And we are just living in the spaces between them.
That's it for this deep dive into the urban hierarchy. Thanks for listening.
So, I want you to picture the net worth of a massive modern corporation. We are talking like $17 billion.
That is just a staggering number to even wrap your head around.
Right. Now, I want you to imagine taking every single penny of that wealth, packing it into a wooden box, and just dropping it 600 meters down to the absolute pitch black bottom of the ocean.
I mean, it stops being just money at that depth. You know, a number like 17 billion sitting in the dark for 3 centuries. It basically turns into mythology, becomes this ghost story that governments and, treasure hunters and historians just obsess over.
Yeah, exactly. But the crazy thing is, this isn't a myth. This is a very real, very physical shipwreck. Today, we are taking a deep dive into a massive Wikipedia dossier on what is widely considered the holy grail of shipwrecks. I'm talking about the Spanish galleon San Jose.
San Jose, yeah, this is a massive topic.
It really is. And our mission for this deep dive is to untangle a story that starts with a violent, fiery sinking in 1708, and then evolves into a multi-billion-dollar modern legal war. And, ultimately it forces us to confront the incredibly complex reality of who actually owns history.
Which is a much messier question than it sounds.
Oh, absolutely. Okay, let's unpack this, because before we can get into the modern court battles and the underwater robots, we have to understand the sheer scale of what was lost. We need to look at why it was gathered in the first place and the mechanics of how it violently disappeared.
Right. So to really understand the San Jose,
Yeah.
we have to travel back to 1698.
Okay.
This was a 64-gun galleon of the Spanish Navy.
Yeah.
It was built in Spain at the Maypil shipyard alongside its twin ship, the San Joaquin.
The twin ships, right.
Yeah. And these were the apex predators of the ocean at the time. I mean, massive, heavily timbered, and just bristling with artillery.
So fast forward 10 years to 1708. The San Jose is serving as the flagship of a massive Spanish treasure fleet. We're talking 3 warships and 14 merchant vessels sailing from Portobello, Panama, heading to Cartagena, Colombia.
A huge convoy.
Right. And the cargo, well, this is where that $17 billion figure comes into play.
Exactly. The cargo is what turns this from just a standard naval transport into a global economic pivot point. It is estimated that the San Jose was carrying 11 million pesos in gold, silver, emeralds, and jewelry.
Wow.
And that silver and gold, it was primarily mined in South America, specifically from the mines of Potosi in what is now Bolivia.
And all of this wealth, it wasn't just sitting there for decoration, right? This was the lifeblood of an empire.
Yeah, this vast fortune was being transported across the Atlantic to finance the Spanish king's efforts in the War of the Spanish Succession.
Which was a huge deal.
Oh, it was a sprawling global conflict.
Yeah.
The Spanish crown was bleeding resources, and they desperately needed that South American wealth just to keep their military machine functioning.
So we have this heavily armed floating bank vault, basically carrying the GDP of a small nation. But I have to push back on the logistics here.
Okay, sure.
Putting all your empire's wealth on a wooden ship filled with tons of explosive gunpowder seems incredibly reckless. Like, was this standard practice or just an act of sheer desperation for the war effort?
Well, it was a calculated, albeit terrifying, risk. The mechanics of 18th century naval transport demanded it. You couldn't exactly split the treasure across 50 small, unarmed ships, right?
So they'd be sitting ducks.
Exactly. Pirates and rival navies would just pick them off one by one. So you had to consolidate the wealth onto your most formidable floating fortresses.
Makes sense, but still terrifying.
Very, because you are highlighting the extreme volatility of that combination. You have a wooden hull, hundreds of men, and massive powder magazines filled with volatile black powder, all navigating these deeply hostile waters.
And that volatility was fully realized on June 8th, 1708. This is in an engagement known as Wagers Action, or the Battle of Baru. The Spanish fleet encounters a British squadron just south of Cartagena.
Right.
It's a full-blown naval battle, cannons are firing, and then disaster strikes the San Jose.
The ship's powder magazines detonated. And to understand the physics of this, we aren't talking about a ship slowly taking on water and sinking like the Titanic.
No, this was fast.
Very fast. Black powder in the 18th century was notoriously unstable. A direct hit from a British cannonball, or even just a stray spark from the San Jose's own guns, somehow found its way into the lower decks where the munitions were stored.
It's just a massive explosion.
Yeah. What's fascinating here is the sheer totality of their destruction. The detonation didn't just breach the hull. It vaporized a significant portion of the ship.
Lord.
The galleon was instantaneously annihilated, and it sank in a matter of minutes, taking that immense fortune right down with it.
And the crew.
Yeah, much more tragically, it took the crew. Out of the 600 men on board, only 11 survived.
11 out of 600.
It was a devastating blow to a global empire's war machine and just a massive loss of human life. And it ended up sitting untouchable at a depth of 600 meters.
So you have $17 billion essentially frozen in time. The ocean acted like this ultimate vault, holding this fortune until human technology finally evolved enough to reach it.
Exactly.
And the second we had the tech in the 1980s, a modern gold rush began. The memory of that sinking sparked a treasure hunt that quickly devolved into an absolute labyrinth of international lawsuits.
Yeah, the transition from a lost historical artifact to a modern legal nightmare basically kicks off in 1981. A United States-based investor group called Glaucomora Company, operating under the name Sea Search Armada, or SSA, steps onto the stage.
And they aren't just random treasure hunters with scuba gear, right?
No, not at all. They were spearheaded by Dr. Eugene Lyon, who was a highly respected historian. He had already successfully located and identified other famous wrecks, like the Atocha.
Right, so they brought serious academic and financial credibility to the table.
They did. So in 1981, SSA claims to have found the wreck of the San Jose off the coast of Colombia. And under standard maritime practices of the time, they fully expected a massive payout for providing the coordinates to the host nation.
They offered the Colombian government a 6-5-35 split.
Right.
But Colombia looks at the coordinates provided by SSA, completely disputes them, and outright refuses the offer. They also deny SSA permission to conduct any full salvage operations at the site.
And Colombia went much further than just a simple refusal. They fundamentally changed the legal architecture of the country to block the salvage company.
Oh, wow.
The Colombian parliament literally passed a new law asserting the state's absolute right to all of the treasure.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because under this new law, SSA's potential share was slashed from their proposed 65% down to a mere 5% finder's fee.
A huge drop.
Huge. And to add incredible insult to injury, that 5% would then be taxed at a rate of 45%.
Which is just brutal math.
It's like finding a winning lottery ticket buried in a public park, and the city responds by changing the municipal code overnight just to ensure you only get to keep, like, the lint in your pocket.
And that's a great way to put it. The legal maneuvering by Colombia was undeniably aggressive. They essentially legislated the American investors right out of the equation.
And SSA did not accept this quietly.
Naturally, in 1989, they sued the Colombian government in Colombian courts.
Which kicks off decades of legal ping pong. In July 2007, there is this glimmer of hope for the American investors. The Supreme Court of Colombia actually concludes that any recovered treasure should be split equally 50-50 between the government and the explorers.
But that victory was incredibly short-lived. The political reality in Colombia made enforcing that ruling nearly impossible for a foreign entity.
Right.
SSA eventually took their fight to United States courts, hoping for international enforcement or some kind of leverage. However, those cases were dismissed twice, first in 2011 and again in 2015, mostly on technical grounds.
So the U.S. courts effectively declared the galleon to be the property of the Colombian state, just washing their hands of the whole dispute.
Exactly.
So SSA is effectively locked out of the U.S. courts. But then, right at the end of 2015, we get a massive plot twist. November 27, 2015.
Yeah, this was huge. The Colombian Navy announces to the world that they have definitively found the galleon San Jose.
Wow.
But the critical detail, the really important part, is that they claim to have found it in a different location than the coordinates SSA provided back in 1981.
Right. Then President Juan Manuel Santos announces it on television. And they didn't just stumble upon it with a deep-sea fishing net. They brought in some serious hardware to map the ocean floor.
They utilized a REMUS 6000 autonomous underwater vehicle. And to understand the leaping capabilities here, you have to realize that at 600 meters deep, the ocean exerts roughly 60 atmospheres of pressure.
Which is crushing.
Yeah, it is pitch black and instantly lethal to human divers.
So you send down a robot.
A very sophisticated one. The REMUS 6000 is essentially a torpedo-shaped drone. It swims autonomously using side-scan sonar to map the topography of the seafloor.
Incredible.
And when the sonar detects anomalies like shapes that don't look like natural rocks, the vehicle can be programmed to go back over those specific coordinates with high-resolution cameras.
Okay.
And from those dive photographs, Colombian marine archaeologists were able to positively identify the wreck.
But wait, at 600 meters deep over 300 years, I have to imagine the wood is mostly eaten away by shipworms and everything else is completely encrusted in coral.
Oh, absolutely.
So how do you even prove it's the San Jose and not just some random merchant ship from the same era? Did they find, like, a brass bell with a name stamped on it?
No, they found something even more distinctive in the ship's artillery.
The cannons.
Yeah. The San Jose was heavily armed with very specific bronze cannons, and the archival records showed that these particular guns were custom cast with the shapes of dolphins on them.
No way.
Yes. And the REMUS 6000 captured crystal clear images of those bronze dolphins resting on the seafloor. That was the smoking gun.
So Colombia finds it, classifies the exact location as a strict state secret, and claims the galleon as part of its submerged patrimony, which means they are constitutionally obligated to protect it.
Right. And the introduction of this advanced technology completely rewired maritime law. It turned the ocean deeps from inaccessible, forgotten graves into highly contested, very accessible legal jurisdictions.
We abruptly shifted from a Wild West era of private treasure hunting to an era of strict, technologically enforced state sovereignty.
Exactly.
But SSA isn't just walking away from $17 billion. In 2022, they filed a suit at the Permanent Court of Arbitration. Their argument is that Colombia's so-called new discovery in a highly classified location is basically a ruse.
A geographical sleight of hand.
Exactly. A trick to invalidate SSA's original 1981 claim and monopolize the treasure.
The geopolitical stalemate here is absolutely fascinating. But, the fight between a U.S. investment firm and the Colombian government over coordinates and finder's fees is really only one layer of this dispute.
Yeah, because as the reality of actually recovering this unimaginable fortune sets in, much deeper historical and moral claims have started to surface.
Very much so.
We are looking at a multi-front war over who owns the past.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to look at who else is stepping into this legal arena. Spain, for instance, has laid a formal claim to the treasure.
And Spain's argument isn't about coordinates or finder's fees at all. They argue that the San Jose was a commissioned galleon of the Spanish Navy.
Right. They are relying on a bedrock principle of international maritime law called sovereign immunity.
Okay, what does that mean in practice?
Well, this principle dictates that a sovereign warship on a non-commercial mission remains the property of its flag state forever, regardless of where it sank or how much time has passed.
Wow. Forever.
Forever. It never becomes abandoned property in the eyes of the law, meaning anyone who tampers with it without Spain's permission is technically interfering with Spanish government property.
So Colombia says it's in their territorial waters, Spain says it's their sovereign military vessel, and the American investors say they found it first.
It's a mess.
But there is a fourth claim that completely upends the traditional legal frameworks.
Yeah, and the most profound claim comes from the very people whose land the wealth was extracted from in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
Indigenous groups from Potosi, Bolivia, have asserted a powerful historical claim to the contents of the San Jose.
Because that 11 million pesos in gold and silver didn't just magically materialize in the ship's hold, it was mined from Cerro Rico, the rich mountain, by their ancestors.
Exactly. The Bolivian claim forces the international community to look at the harsh mechanics of colonial wealth generation.
Right.
The Spanish Empire utilized a brutal, mandatory labor draft system known as the mita. Indigenous communities were forced to send a quota of their male population to work in the silver mines of Potosi.
And the conditions in those mines were notoriously lethal.
The human cost was catastrophic. Workers faced frequent mine collapses, starvation, and severe mercury poisoning, because mercury was the primary chemical used to refine the silver ore.
That's horrifying.
It is. The wealth sitting at the bottom of the ocean was synthesized directly from the forced labor and massive mortality of the indigenous populations of the Andes. So their claim argues that the treasure is not Spanish military property, nor is it Colombian patrimony, but rather the stolen inheritance of the Bolivian people.
I mean, let's play out how a modern court actually weighs this. Salvage rights treat a shipwreck like a lost wallet you found on the street. You turned it in, so you get a reward.
Right.
But cultural patrimony treats the ship like an active crime scene or a sacred grave. You don't get to pocket the evidence or the jewelry just because you walked past the yellow tape.
That's a good analogy.
And going further, if a thief steals your family watch and a river sweeps the thief away, whoever finds the watch 300 years later doesn't own it. It's still your family's watch. So how does international law even begin to reconcile a 300-year-old colonial claim of sovereign immunity against an indigenous claim of systemic lethal exploitation?
The short answer is that international law is currently struggling to find a vocabulary for this. The courts are built to handle the lost wallet scenario, contracts, salvage percentages, and territorial borders.
Not the moral stuff.
Right. They are not well equipped to litigate historical trauma or adjudicate the moral debts of a fallen empire. Can a $17 billion fortune ever truly be untangled from the human suffering that pulled it from the earth?
It's a heavy question. But while the lawyers, diplomats, and historians argue over the abstract billions and the ethical implications, scientists and archaeologists are finally making physical contact with this ghost ship. We are moving from the courtroom to the ocean floor.
Yes, and the Colombian Institute of Anthropology and History, known as ICANN, has been placed in charge of overseeing the physical site.
ICANN.
And they have taken a very firm stance. The San Jose is officially classified as submerged cultural patrimony. It is not a pile of cash, waiting to be liquidated on the open market.
And the timeline of recovery is moving incredibly fast right now. In May 2024, the first stage of a dedicated research project began, using underwater robots to start gathering a meticulous centimeter-by-centimeter inventory of the wreck site without disturbing it.
Yeah, and following that mapping, there was a major academic breakthrough. In June 2025, a study published in the prestigious journal Antiquity formally affirmed that the 300-year-old coins discovered in the debris field of the shipwreck do indeed belong to the San Jose.
So it's official.
The archaeological context was definitively verified.
Which leads us to November 2025. After centuries of sitting in the dark, the very first physical items were hauled up to the surface.
Just incredible.
We're talking 3 gold and bronze coins, a cannon, and a remarkably intact porcelain cup. Colombian President Gustavo Petro was actually present to inspect these items directly.
The recovery of those first artifacts is a monumental moment for marine archaeology.
I can imagine.
And the Colombian government has stated that they intend to create specialized laboratories to properly conserve and study the contents. Because bringing items up from a deep water, oxygen-deprived environment requires immediate chemical stabilization so they don't just disintegrate.
Oh, of course.
There are also concrete plans to construct a custom museum in Cartagena, specifically to host the galleon's artifacts.
And for the items they consider repetitive, for example, if they bring up 80,000 identical silver coins, the Office of the Inspector General has requested those be given to the Banco de la República for national preservation.
Which is a smart way to handle the sheer volume of material.
Definitely. So what does this all mean? After decades of lawsuits, after centuries of myth-making, a porcelain cup and 3 coins finally break the surface. It proves it's real. It's no longer just a story.
The physical objects make the history tangible, and the San Jose has already permeated cultural consciousness. I mean, the discovery inspired a 2022 graphic novel by Marco T. Rubio.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and the sinking itself was even a plot point in Gabriel Garcia Marquez's famous novel, Love in the Time of Cholera.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, but actually bringing these items out of the water, this raises an important question about the delicate balancing act Colombia must perform moving forward.
Because they aren't just curating a standard museum exhibit, they are navigating a diplomatic minefield.
Exactly. They are managing multiple overlapping realities. They have to protect this site as a pristine scientific time capsule. But they must also maintain the reverence owed to a mass grave.
Right. 589 men died violently when that powder magazine exploded.
Yes. Colombia has to balance the solemnity of a gravesite against the intense, relentless global pressure of a $17 billion price tag attached to the cargo.
It is an immense burden for one nation to shoulder. For you listening, I think this deep dive really serves as a stark reminder that history isn't static. It isn't just a list of dates trapped in a textbook.
Not at all.
It is actively discovered, it is fiercely debated, and it remains deeply relevant today. The San Jose isn't just a shipwreck. It is a mirror. It reflects modern greed, it forces us to look at the long, complicated legacy of colonialism, and it showcases the incredible advances of deep-sea technology.
And if Colombia eventually builds that museum in Cartagena and you walk through the doors to view these pristine gold coins under the glass, are you looking at a triumph of modern marine archaeology, a reclaimed national treasure, or the preserved spoils of a colonial war that cost thousands of indigenous and sailors' lives? When we bring the past to the surface, we don't just recover gold, we resurrect all the ghosts attached to it.